IBM-TV International Broadcast Media, this is The Lawyer's Den, a special report from American politics on the Supreme Court. This unique broadcast brings you in-depth discussions with American leaders in the law to discuss the current issues. I am Bill Tresvant, and along with my esteemed colleague, Nick Palavita, we are your co-hosts for this evening. Nick, will you please do the honor of introducing our guests?
Yeah, first of all, hailing from Salt Lake City, the lawyer that bails me out of troubles, literally, got me in the Supreme Court where I got into more trouble, but also as a JDLLM attorney out of Salt Lake. Everybody, I would like to welcome to the stream, Salt Lake, Jeff Tykert. He, by the way, has his own cult following, in case you didn't know that, but he does. When I see his post on Facebook, he gets all these people. You know, I'm going like, Lord, this guy's got a cult following. Now, speaking about cults, if you ever happen to be in the state of Georgia, and you happen to be a professor there, and you teach at Georgia College, you'll run into this guy, a professor at Georgia College, who has his own cult following, Adam Laparello. Adam, welcome back to the Lawyer's Den. And of course, we have the person who creates all the problems and gives us homework to do, Bill Tresvant, who is surrounded by LLM envy, as he's got 3 LLM attorneys. And he has
I do want to point out, not to be argumentative, but how come I didn't get claps? Is that because I'm academically in this crew?
Well, if you want me to be truthful, yeah, the clap machine is an artificial intelligent being. The AI machine looks around. The bots look. Do you have an LM? No, you don't get a clap. So anyway, that's really what happened, Bill. So it wasn't personal. It was just the computer acting up.
That's okay. Nick, all I'm going to do is plug the only title that matters, co-host. And so I don't care what else you guys do. I'm co-host, and so I'm going to round that one.
Okay, see, the computer tags co-host because I'm a co-host. So just to let you know, when you say words like that, you're in trouble because, words do get people into trouble, and words also get people out of trouble. That's why you should have lawyers on the Lawyer's Den. So what are the topics we're going to be discussing, Bill?
Well, we have a few topics, but of course, this is regulated only by the extent and limit of the intellect of our guests. And I know that is unlimited. Currently, we have 3 options in front of us. The Supreme Court is set to hear an appeal from the Trump administration's ruling in the lower court against the Trump administration regarding their stay in Mexico policy, which essentially says that anybody who comes to the United States and applies seeking asylum, they have to go and they can apply, but then they have to go and remain south of the border until their case is handled. Some of the critics of that policy have suggested that that could be as long as 2, 3, 4, or 5 years, rather than the previous policies that we undertook as a nation, which was essentially to catch them, have them register, and then we would release them into the United States, catch and release, with periodic appearances in front of judges to check in and that we could monitor them. So that's item number 1. Item number 2, a little bit more esoteric, but quite possibly really meaningful. And that is the use of the Trump administration's authority to redirect previously allocated resources to the building of the wall. Trump sought, I think it was about $3 billion in new monies from Congress at the time, and Congress said no. And so Trump used executive orders and transferred monies that had previously been allocated by Congress or by the House of Representatives to specific projects, redirecting those funds to support his funding of the building of the wall. And the question there is whether or not he had the authority to do that. And quite unsurprisingly, gentlemen, it hits squarely upon executive orders. I know that's a favorite. However, there is a third option. That third option is as we begin to turn our attention, because there are only 15 days left, Nick, until the United States American people at least have rendered their initial decision, notwithstanding delayed ballots and counting. There are a plethora of cases churning their way through the lower courts. And there's an option. There have been some court victories for the Biden camp, and there have been some court victories for the Trump campaign. Depending on it might be that these cases end up in front of the newly constituted or soon to be constituted Supreme Court. So all three subjects are on the table, and I have three brilliant minds, and I don't mind hugging. Watch this, Adam. You ready? Because it's almost automatic now. I don't mind being co-host, and I get what, Nick?
Well, I think you might be able to get some applause if you're really the co-host and you're not fooling any of us around here. But I'm not sure if the bot's going to recognize your co-host status after the initial introductions. But I do think you have some good questions that we should ask our worthy attorneys, especially this one about the the immigration into the United States. So maybe they have some opinions on this. So, Adam, what is your thoughts detaining people on the other side of the wall?
Well, I think this is a really interesting case, and it really comes down to a matter of statutory interpretation. Specifically, under 8 U.S.C. 1225 B1 and B2, the question is whether these individuals are classified as under Section B1 or under Section B2. If they're classified under Section B2, which includes individuals coming in illegally that have, for example, a communicable disease or engaged in terrorist activities, then the president would be authorized under the statute to have them immediately returned. But if they're classified as people under Section B1, which typically refers to people who just do not have documents establishing their right to be here, then the provision in the statute does not authorize their immediate removal and return. And I think what the Ninth Circuit did was interpret this as a matter of textualism and say that the plaintiffs who were properly classified as 1225 B1 individuals, and therefore not subject to the what they call the contiguous return provision of the statute. What do I think is going to happen? I think the Supreme Court's probably going to reverse it because there is another possible way to look at it. I think they're going to reverse it on a 5-2 basis. And once again, I think it's going to politicize the court. I think it's going to damage its legitimacy. And I think it's going to lead to a decision that does not engender public confidence in its decision making.
Really? Jeff, what is your thought?
Well, I don't have a lot more to add to what Adam said. I know the district court basically said that the president had not upheld, had not enforced, that his policy contravenes the precise language of the statute. I agree with Adam that it does depend on whether you follow subsection 1 or subsection 2. And so, I think he set the table for what the issue is going to be. How the Supreme Court's going to go on it, I have no idea.
Really? What are your thoughts, Bill?
Well, actually, I had a quick question of Adam. Adam, you mentioned 5-2. Why only including 7 justices when we should have 9?
I'm sorry, I said 5-4.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
I think it's going to be a 5-4 decision, although I do suspect that Neil Gorsuch will be a wild card here. I'm not sure how he'll rule. But again, this case reminds me of a number of cases where the Ninth Circuit rules a certain way and the Supreme Court comes in and reverses the Ninth Circuit. And what really bothers me about all of this is that what's really happening here is that the litigants are using the courts for their political ends. Okay, and that's really what the case is here, and I think it's problematic. And I think that if the Supreme Court, as I expect, reverses, it's going to be seen as a political decision, and it's going to be very divisive, and it's not going to engender any public confidence.
Okay, well, okay. Adam, on that, as a follow-up, the issue, I hear you when you say that the decisions are going to be seen as political. However, isn't that disingenuous? Because all decisions invoke either one side or the other side of a particular policy, and by definition, that's taking a position, and by definition, that's political. So I'm a little concerned, Adam, that you are just brushing away as well everything's political and summarily dismissing normally be a legitimate difference of opinion. Are you?
Yes, I am, and I'm doing that because I believe, and I think empirical data confirms that judges make decisions in cases like this based on their ideological predilections and based on their policy preferences, and that's why I am a strong proponent of having the courts stay out of this business, because you can almost predict how the judges are going to rule, even how the circuits are going to rule, and they're doing it under the guise of complex legal language. What they're really doing is they are voting in accordance with their own policy predilections, and that's wrong. And I think that really delegitimizes the court, and I think that's why the courts should stay out of it.
Jeff. Jeff.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you agree?
Well, with regard to what Adam just said, I mean, I tend to agree with him that courts shouldn't get involved in trying to resolve divisive social issues and things like that with judicial decisions where there isn't law or constitutional provisions to back up that decision. I think Chief Justice Roger Taney made a big mistake in the Dred Scott decision, trying to come into a politically contentious issue and tell the nation what it ought to do, and resolve an issue that really should have been resolved in the political arena. I believe that as a general principle. However, if it has been resolved in a political arena, even by a close vote, then I think we have to look at it differently. And sometimes the Supreme Court has to make a decision that's going to be politically divisive or politically unpopular. I think they should do it by resort to the language of the Constitution or the statute and put it on as firm a ground as they can. I don't necessarily agree with Adam that the Supreme Court has to or even should shy away from everything that has political overtones. Otherwise, you could take an issue that Congress has clearly spoken to, and the president's trying to undermine it, and the Supreme Court would stand back and say, "You two fight it out." I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that sometimes it has to resolve issues where maybe there is law on the subject, and staying out of it would be abdicating their duty.
Okay, Nick, let me ask you: do you think that this is just if the court were to bounce it back, that it's just going to spark the larger ongoing debate regarding immigration reform? Because this is just another hot button issue that followed with the wall, and then of course we've got all of the the separation of the families and things. Do you see this case as just a larger piece of a larger issue that the courts, given its new potential makeup as of maybe 2 weeks from now, will seek to throw it all the way back into the political arena?
Of course. The thing is, come on, Bill, this is absolutely insane. Can you imagine you're an immigrant? I'm coming in from Guatemala, and they are all talking to each other. Are you a B1 or a B2 immigrant? I mean, come on. Do they discuss whether I'm a B1 or a B2 immigrant? It just shows our immigration policy is just absolutely insane. Somebody with extreme mental illness must have created it and administer it, even today. I mean, there's absolutely no way it makes sense. We have, 11 million illegal immigrants floating around in the United States today, and they're still illegal. How can that work? It doesn't. And here's my argument. The statute of limitations should apply, but as I read through the case law, statute of limitations don't apply to immigration. They do to every other crime. If you commit battery, assault, every other crime except murder and rape, you could go rob the 7-Eleven, take a bunch of money, and then after 5 years, you can say, hey, look, I robbed the 7-Eleven, I took a bunch of money. I'm innocent, though, because the statute of limitations run. Yet you cross the border, you come to the United States, statute never runs. They don't have a statute of limitations. So our immigration laws are absolutely horrible. Even the lady I had that came in from South Africa, took her like 10 years to become a citizen. Mm-hmm. There was nothing wrong with her, Bill. And so the thing is, we have an immigration system that is broken, continually be broken, and demonstrating to the whole world how broken it is, just with the 11 million immigrant illegals here that should be legal. But what will make matters worse? B1 or B2? What do you have? You have to be a bloody immigration. You have to be a constitutional lawyer to get inside the United States. So this is absolutely insane. I don't know why we're having this discussion.
Well, no,
Except it's interesting because it is insane.
No, we are having this discussion, and what
Right.
I want to do is I do want to put a human face on it. And Jeff, you have upfront and close experience with somebody trying to get into the United States that you thought was absolutely ridiculous given the current immigration policy. Do I have that correct?
If you're speaking of my brother-in-law, my wife's sister's husband, yeah, I went over to Ethiopia partly to help him fill out his immigration papers. He does have a green card now, but it took him 2 years in the pipeline, more than 2 years. And he actually he and his wife were having such a hard time making a living. They went to China, had no problem getting into China and teaching English there. English is his second language, but he speaks it very well. And he got a job there teaching English, and they stayed there for over a year while they were waiting for his green card his spouse visa to be granted. And I looked at it like, okay, this guy speaks English really well. He's admitted to an American university, and he's married to an American. This should be a rubber stamp. This should be easy. But it wasn't. It took a long time. I don't view that necessarily as a problem in our judicial system. I think it's an immigration system that, like Nick says, is overly complicated and broken. And I think we need a major overhaul. I think Congress needs to step up and do that.
Right.
But listen, isn't it completely complicated because of these nameless, faceless bureaucrats that are interpreting the rules and then being exploited for political purposes, in this case, Adam, by the Trump administration, which caused this very problem that you now with which complain, saying it's political. And I hate to do it, but at a certain level, us out here in the world that don't have LLMs, we're reduced to shouting in court. They did it first. So they did it first, Adam. But I'm just simply saying that it isn't also because you've got these immigration people making these stark changes. Because if I can, for a mere moment, when the Trump administration came in and they announced that they were going to take a very hard line on immigration policy, they not only failed to fill a number of administrative law judge positions along the border. They attempted to, cut down on them, and on top of that, they administered very, very stringent guidelines to the administrative law judges, indicating that said that regardless of all of their prior approaches in dealing with cases and deciding who would be caught and set free, and et cetera, limiting not only what they could do in terms of judicial rulings, but also increasing the quota number of how many cases they had to process each day. And this led to some really outrageous kinds of examples. However, isn't that all of that cascades from an administration's change in interpretation, which then cascades down through all of these people that we do not know, and therefore we end up arguing over some really insane stuff. Jeff's family can't get in. Nick is upset. And you know what it takes for a pension attorney to get upset? Pension attorneys never get upset. Everything's planned out. They have actuarials. I think that their actuarials tell them which days they can be angry. But Nick is upset. So, Adam, can you help me out here?
Yes, I can help by saying then the legislature has to fix the problem. It's their responsibility as a constitutional matter and as a practical matter. I go back to the basic philosophy that I have. If a statute is capable of being reasonably interpreted in different ways, or if a constitutional provision is capable of being interpreted in reasonably different ways, the courts should not be involved. They should let it play out through the democratic process. Marbury versus Madison allows the court, sure, to say what the law is, but not what it should be. And when you have ambiguity, or you have indeterminacy, or a statute or a constitutional provision that can be reasonably interpreted differently, I don't see why on earth the court is getting involved, especially when it leads to 5-4 decisions. To me, it makes no sense and is fundamentally anti-democratic.
Nick?
Yeah, I mean, I have to agree with Adam. The real problem is the legislature. In other words, they need to craft laws that are actually simple and easy to enforce. The reason it's bothered me, Bill, is that I hired a person from South Africa who was coming over here to live, and she needed a job. And she did get her green card. She did enter legally, but it took almost 10 bloody years to get her approved in the United States. It was insane as she was working for us and waiting and waiting and waiting. It's like, why don't you do an application to go to Disney World, and maybe in 10 years you'll get accepted? It was just dumb. And then I had another person from Canada I hired, and she had to get an HB1 visa. We had to hire a immigration attorney, because I'm not an immigration attorney, to work on it. We finally got her an HB1 visa so she could work here in the United States. So as a practical matter, as an employer, I've faced the immigration rules. I've paid my immigration taxes, and I'm sick and tired of it. And so the thing is, when you look at our entire system, who's it benefiting? Maybe immigration attorneys, maybe some other people that I don't even see that are benefiting. And then to see the amount of illegal people in the United States that we crucify only because we don't have a statute of limitations, which we do for every other crime. They go, oh, they're criminals. Wait a minute. Criminals, like I say, after 5 years have their crimes absolved, but not immigration people. So you have people here today, Bill, that are hardworking people that have been here more than 5 years and never committed any crimes. They work their tails off, and they're not citizens. This is absolutely insane. So it is the fault of your senators, the fault of your legislature, and they all need to be fired. Well, not all, but the ones that aren't addressing the situation seriously.
All right, Jeff. And then
well, I agree partly with what Adam said, and I agree with pretty much everything that Nick just said. I think it is a legislative problem. The immigration laws are a mishmash, and depending on which new administration gets in, it changes with the winds of politics. And I think really it needs a major overhaul. It needs reform. We need to have clearer criteria by which people can get into the United States. I would like to see it faster and easier to legally immigrate, and then make it more difficult to illegally immigrate. I don't know if you're ready to talk about the wall yet, but that definitely has some implications there as well.
No, actually, we certainly can turn our attention to the wall, but I have to say this, that, and it's a compliment to both you, Jeff, and you, Adam, that sometimes listening to the other side can have an impact. And I find myself persuaded by your arguments because the Supreme Court has been unnecessarily sticking their nose into things that are causing problems. Now, I say that as a proponent of a living constitution, but it creates a lot of stuff that I wish they would stay out and just leave it to the legislator so that the good friends of mine out there in the streets can keep it out of your interpretive hands, and then we can just go make the law. But I did want to give us some recognition where it's due. And I am having one of those moments because I'm really not quite sure if I'm being led down the path or that you guys are just right. But let's turn to the wall. Jeff, do you want to start with the wall? Because I know what Nick's going to say. Nick, unless you want to start.
No, I'll have Jeff start with the wall.
Okay, and then we're going to you, Nick. Jeff?
Okay, well, I would like to say to our viewers, I'm going to ask for some maturity and how you consider this, because number one, as a conservative Republican who believes in legal immigration and wants to end illegal immigration, I'm for the wall. However, how we do things in a republic matters just as much as what we do, maybe more. In other words, if you want to control crime, maybe the fastest way is to send a bunch of Gestapo agents out with rude attitudes and shoot everybody who's accused of anything. That might be a faster way to control crime, but is that the way we want to do it in our country? No, we have a thing called due process of law, and we have courts and prosecutors and police. We have juries, and it's a very cumbersome process to control crime. But we do it that way because we believe how we do things is important, and we believe in protecting people's rights. Well, this is a little bit more of an abstract kind of issue, But I believe what Trump did in redirecting funds to the wall from other things Congress had appropriated it for, particularly after Congress refused to appropriate it for the wall, was unconstitutional. And I think that's certainly an issue he could take into the next election and say, hey, I tried to build the wall, but Congress wouldn't appropriate the money. All right, that's fair game. Go out there and campaign on that, run against the do nothing Congress, whatever. But here's the thing, Justice Scalia explained it to me this way. The president, the Congress has all the money, the president has all the guns. And that's ultimately how things split down the middle. Congress has control of the purse, the power of the purse. That is the power that they use to exercise leverage over the executive. If he can just take money they've appropriated for one thing and move it to something else, what has Congress got left? I think it's very dangerous. The English fought 2 civil wars over this issue. The Americans fought a revolution over this issue. Taxation without representation is tyranny. The power to tax and the power to appropriate belong to the people's elected representatives. So what I'm saying is, whether you're for the wall or against the wall, let's do it in a constitutionally appropriate way. So the fact that I am for the wall doesn't mean I'm for any unconstitutional measure to get it done.
Wow. Nick, look, I mean, was my moment of candor brushing off on Jeff?
No, that's Jeff. He's very by the book. But let's listen to Adam, because he actually has to teach people about this stuff. Curious what his thoughts on that. Gorbachev, tear down that wall.
I agree with Jeff. I think the process by which we make decisions is just as important, if not, in fact, more important than the outcomes or policies that we reach. I can go back to Roe versus Wade and say, look, I may personally believe in a woman's right to choose, to terminate the pregnancy or choose, but the decision was constitutionally indefensible. And then I'll go back to Clinton versus New York, when Congress passed the line item veto statute, giving the president the authority to strike certain portions of spending bills to increase fiscal responsibility. Well, the court, by a 6-3 decision, invalidated that because they said essentially the president was appropriating power under the presentment clause that was reserved to Congress. It's not entirely directly analogous here, but it's kind of the same principle. Like Jeff was saying, that they are Trump is using the funds for a purpose that was not authorized and appropriating to himself a power under the appropriations clause that, like the presentment clause, is reserved to Congress. And I agree with Jeff also. I don't really care about my policy predilections. I really don't. I care about the integrity of the decision-making process. And here I think that we have a very, very serious constitutional problem.
Nick,
Well, I'm not a big believer in misallocation of assets in the United States. Seriously, you could have an electronic fence that goes up and down Mexico a lot cheaper than a big bloody concrete wall that eventually is going to be in a history book somewhere. Electronic fence would work technologically and then save all that money and use it to develop our own personal infrastructure, high-speed railroads, bigger and better cities, clean energy. In other words, it's a misallocation of the assets. So let's get the borders taken care of. But realize most of the people that are coming in are not Mexicans. They're people from Guatemala and frankly El Salvador, which are failed states down there. And the thing is, these people are suffering from crime, unbelievable poverty and crime, and they're going through Mexico on the way to the United States. They're not people from Mexico coming in. It's because they're leaving basically a desperate situation. So what do we do as friendly Americans? We put a wall in front of them. Of course, that makes a lot of sense. And I think, isn't that what the Statute of Liberty says? It says, tell your poor and your homeless and your hopeless to get the heck out of our country. It's right there on the little Statute of Liberty as you go through Ellis Island. And only, by the way, bring us your top 1%. Now, if it doesn't say that, let's just get perfectly clear. Let's put it on the Statute of Liberty. We will take your 1%, everybody else go home. And just make it clear that that's American policy. If so, then I'm totally in favor. Put the electronic fence and let the world know we only take the 1% and everybody else go home. Period. We're being very disingenuous with that Statue of Liberty. Maybe we should tear down that thing.
No, we're not going to do
Well,
that.
they
That
tore down a lot of statutes here. I don't know if you know that, Bill.
well,
All those Confederate
and-
statutes got axed. Well, maybe the Statue of Liberty needs to get axed.
No, I think that was just a bit of a discussion, to use to quote from our cousins across the pond. Just a bit of an issue. Whereas the Statue of Liberty is a piece of fine French art.
Well, then they can go to France. They don't have to come.
Right. But no. But I know you guys are being facetious, but I really do just want to drill down, and I appreciate all the insight so far. However, an issue is, whether the president can actually redirect the funds. And I hear the salient, zealous argument saying no, and that we have to follow the process. But what about in times of emergency? Can't the president legitimately reallocate previously directed funds for purposes if it's a national emergency? And I believe that's the argument that they're making here, that there was a national emergency and therefore the president had the right under the Emergency Powers Act to go ahead and redirect this. Now, I get all the the puffery about the process makes sense, but Adam, isn't that really just another way of saying there's substantive due process in the Constitution? Who cares? I mean, we needed to get the wall built because it's a matter of national emergency. The president has the executive order to shift resources in a time to defend the nation. And why shouldn't that argument prevail? Jeff. Adam, I'm giving you time.
Oh, me? Okay. Well, because what the president is doing is clearly violating the Constitution. And this goes back to something that I've previously said, which is I think the Supreme Court does and should have an active role when legislation or other government action plainly and clearly violates the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, of course. That is when the Supreme Court should step in. But when a constitutional provision is ambiguous and susceptible to different interpretations, the court shouldn't get involved, and it should let things play out democratically, because that's the way our constitutional structure is designed.
Isn't that the case?
No, because here what's happening is, the question is this: the words national emergency remind me of national security. It seems like such a catch-all, all-encompassing term. But the question is what the president is doing, does it reasonably relate to the purpose for which Congress allocated those funds? Can you imply that by allocating funds for the purpose that Congress was, which I believe was an anti-narcotics operation, can you imply that it was reasonably related to that to divert the funds? That would be the test I would use. And if the answer is no, then I would say it's unconstitutional in violation of the Appropriations Clause, and I would invalidate it.
Jeff, you have the tape.
Well, my understanding of this argument from some people is that, yes, the president invoked his emergency powers to repel an invasion. Well, I don't think anyone believes that as commander-in-chief, if there's a genuine invasion of an armed force from another country, that the president doesn't have the power to order the military into action to repel that invasion. I don't see immigrants trying to swim the Rio Grande, excuse me, to get a better job as an invasion of the country. I don't believe that's what the framers of the Constitution said. I think that is almost as ludicrous as suggesting that somehow there's a right to abortion under the Due Process Clause of the Constitution. It simply strains the terminology beyond its rational meaning. And I don't know.
No, but Jeff, hang on. I mean, you're attempting, it seems to me, to apply a reasonable judgment standard to the president's decisions. And I don't know that we have a rule, or that there's a statute or a provision in the Constitution that says we get to review what the commander-in-chief does as a secondary, say, appellate review as to whether or not it satisfies a reasonable person standard. In fact, the commander-in-chief gets to make a decision and then move forward. So isn't it really viewed through the eyes of the commander-in-chief at the time that he makes the decision, whether or not, in fact, there exists an emergency threatening the nation? Jeff?
Well, as I recall, Richard Nixon made similar arguments to that in Watergate, and he said, if the president does it, that means it's not illegal. But of course, he lost that argument, not only in the Supreme Court, but in the court of public opinion. I think you're right in a sense that we don't get to second guess what the president does in a moment of extreme national emergency when he has to act immediately and he can't go to Congress for a declaration of war or something like that. In this case, I mean, immigrants have been pouring across our border for decades and we haven't done anything about it. And suddenly it's a national emergency because we've got a different president. And I don't see that to be anywhere near the same thing. I mean, I'm sympathetic to all the problems that Trump and the others are saying we have to deal with related to illegal immigration. And I believe we as a country have a right to know who's coming here and what they're doing here. I believe in all that, but we need to do it in a constitutionally proper way. And I think that means when Congress refuses to appropriate the funds, you don't get to just take it from somewhere else and move it over.
Okay, Nick, we're going to come to you, but the first thing I want to point out simply, because I just find this program remarkable. Here we have Jeff on the right and we have Adam on the left, and yet they both agree. And quite frankly, I am struck by the reasonableness of both sides. I can't imagine. And in the lawyer's den, Nick, what do you make of all of this? Is this another indication that this is 2020 and all bets are off? Because I'm not used to this, Nick.
Yeah, well, that's the reason you have me, because I'm totally unreasonable. So I'm going to increase the unreasonableness of Emma Lazarus's statement in 1883 on our Statute of Liberty. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore, which I guess is the other side of the Rio Grande. Okay, here's the reality, Bill. We don't believe in any of that. I mean, the thing is, give me your tired, your poor, or do we believe in that? If we do believe in that, then we need to reform our immigration. If we don't believe in that, then you need to get rid of this thing that's on your Statute of Liberty. Because instead, what we're arguing is whether it's a B1 or B2 immigrant that's coming in, rather than having our immigration policy set straight. Now, as soon as we get our immigration policy set straight, then you're going to see some changes. But until we do that, you're going to see this go on and on. I mean, it's our immigration policy is like just a walking nightmare. And in terms of the wall, I think this whole thing, national security, is a bit of a pretext and probably didn't have the right to do that. But in terms of having secured borders, yeah, we could do that. But I think you can do it technologically with an electronic fence. You don't need to spend massive amounts of money on concrete and a wall, and then take the money that you were going to use in that area and use it to build our bridges that are falling down, our roads that have potholes, our train system, which when I was in Europe last year, the Italian trains work better than ours. Now they're finally building a corridor.
Nick,
I mean, are you kidding me? We're like a third world country. We have people that are in hunger. We got people that are in poverty. You used to eat dinner and say, oh, think of the starving people in India. Now you say, think of the starving people in the United States. We have a lot of problems here that need to be solved. Last thing we need to do is put a lot of money into a concrete wall that's going to be a relic in about 5 years.
Nick, please. I trust that you did not mean to imply or advance the argument that we're so far behind that even the Italians are ahead of us, because that is slippery slope argument. And
it's not slippery slope, it's reality.
Do you have something to say about that? Because I'd be a little concerned, and I'm just kind of.
Well, you need to go to Italy, and then you'll find out. See, that's the other problem with you Americans. You don't travel. Well, they're starting to, but they didn't. But your favorite, Amy Coney Barrett, I only had one problem with her, Bill. She has had no experience outside the United States except what she read in the textbook. Okay. And so the thing is, she's never been to Malaysia. She's never been to India. She's never been to Russia. She's never been anywhere except to Notre Dame University. Oh, that's a representative place of the world. Come on. And so the thing is, when she sits on the Supreme Court, she's going to be insulated by what she read in some textbook somewhere. That is not a internationally experienced person. And so when I'm saying things so simple that the trains run better in Italy than they do in the United States, go over there. It's absolutely true. When I say that they contain coronavirus better in Malaysia than they do in the United States, that's true. And our education system, go look at our PISA scores. We're not, in some cases, even the top 25. Our educational system sucks. And so what we have to do is really take a good look at a self-assessment of where we are rather than isolate ourselves and say, hey, we're A plus and we're not.
Wow. Adam.
Well, I completely agree with that. And I think the problem is that our federal and state legislatures have done a very poor job at addressing policy problems. Instead, litigants and organizations have often looked to the court to solve these problems when the court has no business being involved in them. And I agree with Jeff that the process by which the judiciary makes its decisions is critical to its legitimacy and critical to its proper role in a democratic society. And that's where originalism is so important, because by constraining judges to interpret the text honestly, okay, rather than substitute their policy predilections for the legislature, we allow issues to be resolved in the democratic process, and we put the pressure on the legislature to do something about it. I mean, I'm pissed off at the legislature, and I'm pissed off at the court for overstepping its authority. The problem is with Congress, not the court.
Okay. Well, Adam, you had me. I was about ready to sign up for first semester with you and your class for originalism, but I mean, to suggest that I think I'm gonna have to sleep on that for a while. But I'd like to hear from Jeff, because Jeff, maybe you can pull me back from the edge. Because Adam is causing me to question whether or not I should even be listening to you guys. Nick, of course, is just out of bounds, and I have him on mute. So right now, Jeff, do you have anything to say?
Well, Nick made me think a minute ago. There's a couple of experiences I've had that were real formative experiences in my life and even in my legal career. I was a missionary for my church in Australia, and I remember entering the home. It was the bottom level of a split-level house of a man from Zaire and his Swahili wife, and he was a former university professor in Zaire.
Mm-hmm.
And he was whisked away in the middle of the night by Amnesty International because he said too much about the Mobutu government. A guy that spoke 8 languages, I believe. And he, his wife, and all 23 of their children, that's true number, were all living in the bottom level of a split-level house with one bathroom. The youngest had to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning to do his bathroom chores and get ready for school so that everybody could have their turn. It was I still remember vividly talking to this guy and thinking about what we have in the United States and what they have in Australia too, in terms of free speech. And I understand this guy ultimately got a job at a university there in Queensland, but just made me profoundly grateful for the system we have, imperfect as it is, broken as it is sometimes. I also remember my first job as an attorney was a law clerk to the Chief Justice of American Samoa. And I was there 2 years, and when I left, I wrote an article for the Gonzaga International Law Journal, mm-hmm. Published back in, I think, 2001. But it is about the role of Samoan custom in the law of American Samoa, and it tries to grapple with the issues of an English common law system that's sort of overlaid on an indigenous culture and mm-hmm. how it sort of works, what the permutations mm-hmm. are. And so when Nick talks about Judge Barrett, I not having any experience in the world, I don't know that will ultimately make a huge difference on the specific decisions she makes. But, how she deliberates, how she thinks about things, how she looks out at the world and sees the way other people do things, that may be affected, and it may be important to understand that not everything is is the way we do it here in the United States.
Okay, okay. You know, you got. I feel like I'm from the movie The Godfather. Every time I try to get out, you keep pulling me back in. Joe Biden was asked directly whether or not he would support the Merrick Garland court equity program, Nick. And this time, candidate Biden said he wasn't necessarily a fan of it, but he did not discount his consideration of it. Rather, he said that he was not gonna take a position until later on in the election. Now, I can tell our audience, frankly, that's a very cute political maneuver, because he's going to wait for everybody who votes early and locks in whatever lead he may have, and then he's going to whisper, open up the door at like 11:30 at night on November 2nd and say, "I'm going to pack the court," and then close the door. But so, what do we make of that? Because even his hesitation, and notwithstanding his caveat, suggests that, because we know the progressives on the left side of the Democratic Party are going to come after the issue of the Supreme Court. Do we have any different ideas about either the possibility, or have we changed our minds with regard to potential reform of the Supreme Court? I'll start with you, Adam.
If he packs the court, he's going to further politicize the court, and it reflects the fact that Biden and the people on the left think that the Supreme Court, not Congress, is the way to effectuate democratic change. It would be going in an even worse direction than we are now. It should be precisely the opposite. We should be promoting judicial restraint, originalism, and putting the burden on Congress to fix social and political problems. So packing the court doesn't make the problem better. It makes it worse. And it makes it worse because then it's going to be obvious to any reasonable observer that what they're doing is putting people on the court to achieve the outcomes that they desire. And that is so contrary to the rule of law. It's so contrary to separation of powers. It's so contrary to democratic choice. And ultimately, it's damaging and deleterious to individual liberty. I think it's the worst thing that could happen. And
do you have?
Okay. The thing is, obviously, you don't want to pack the court if you can help it. But see, I tend to agree with Adam. The judges should not be making the law. It's up to the legislature. And the thing is, the real problem is it's the legislature that has to move the country forward. The Senate, the House operating together with the president. And the real problem is that we see that the judges are just referees. That's all they are. They are not the decision makers, just the referees. And that what they stand to do, as the Constitution, is basically protect individual liberties against an potential encroaching government. I don't think that his intention is actually to pack the court, but here's the reason he withholds judgment. If you get Looney Tune decisions out there, okay, then he may not have any choice. And with Amy, I don't know if it's true or not, because the thing that really bothered me when we went to science, she struck out. She wiffle balled some of the science questions, which really bother me, because a smart lady like her, which she is, graduated number one in her class, should have looked at IPCC studies, which everybody else has, given her level, and understand the climate change issue, which is 97-3 in favor of, yes, there's climate change. Instead, she whiffed it. She goes, "Well, I'm not a scientist." Really?
Okay, Jeff, does that mean that, and we understand the abiding position that says protect our court, but does that mean that it could come down to the vagaries of one or two decisions, and then suddenly we are in the maelstrom of a court equity plan, Supreme Court reform, whatever you want to call it, court packing plan, just because the one Supreme Court justice that you were very high on last week with across the board recommendations. But it could be that maybe her experience and this issue of being, not recognizing scientific data could be the linchpin. Are you comfortable with that? How are you thinking about that? Because it could mean the balance of the court, Jeff.
Well, I don't think there's a perfect nominee. I still really like this nominee. There's a couple of issues that I have questions about, but so she isn't the issue for me when I think about court packing. To consider this kind of in a historical context, I think when we were looking at Justice Scalia's untimely death, when before the 2016 election, um, it was particularly troubling to Republicans on Capitol Hill and elsewhere, because we had become accustomed, I think, to Supreme Court justices retiring during the term of a president from the party that had appointed that justice. Justice Kennedy was appointed by President Reagan. He retired when the second Bush was in office. And, same thing with Justice O'Connor. And that's been when justices were able to do that, they tried to do that so they could be replaced by someone more or less like them. And I think Justice Scalia dying unexpectedly made that, the possibility was that seat was going to flip if President Obama got to make that appointment and have it carry through. And so the Senate blocked it. I think that's the real context of what was going on, is they didn't want to see Justice Scalia's seat go to someone of an opposite ilk. And does that kind of consideration politicize the court, like Adam said? Yeah, I think it does. And we've seen the same thing play out. The Republicans had a chance to flip Ginsburg's seat to a Democrat or to a Republican appointee, and they really wanted to do that. Their mouths were watering over it. And so I look at court packing with the same kind of idea that it will politicize the court. I look at what happened in FDR's time. He wasn't successful at actually packing the court, but his attempts to pack the court intimidated the Supreme Court into doing what he wanted. Justice Owen Roberts flipped on the federalism issues, and the 10th Amendment got a whole lot weaker because he was afraid that if he didn't, Roosevelt was going to pack the court, and it was the implications of that were going to be worse than weakening his view of the 10th Amendment. And so he went ahead and gave FDR what he wanted, without having to pack the court. Mm-hmm. So I look at that kind of thing happening now, and I just don't want to see it go there. I understand why the Democrats were mad about the way this all went down. Nick and I have talked before about how there was tremendous hypocrisy in the way the whole thing was set up and explained. I think it was explained the way it was when Scalia died, because we didn't expect Justice Ginsburg to die during a Republican presidency, and didn't think we'd have to worry about it for quite some time. Otherwise, I think we might have explained it a little differently and perhaps been a little bit more honest about what it was we were doing. But anyway, that's my take. I don't like the court packing idea. I think it's going to make the situation worse, not better. I think the court's already too political, and we need to put a halt to it. And it's time for some sober reflection, honestly.
Can't hear you, Bill.
Question, and that is this: just for us to consider, is too much going to be read into Justice Barrett, or soon to be Justice Barrett's, first decisions that she may concur in or dissent from in the first couple of months or so of her tenure? Gentlemen? Adam?
I don't think so. I don't think that I would guess that Chief Justice Roberts would assign Judge Barrett to write a non-controversial opinion for her first written opinion, and I think her joining, whether she joins or does not join the majority in her first initial decisions, I think largely it will probably be seen as predictable. But I find myself in a very unique position of being what they would call a liberal originalist, because I have liberal policy views, but I have very originalist interpretive views. And I think that that's a good thing, because I think it's going to really promote legitimacy in the court's decision making and the court as an institution. And I expect that Barrett is going to be like that. I think that she's going to really really decide cases in a sensible way that does consider the practical consequences of her decisions. But I do think that she is going to respect the democratic process, be a humble judge, and realize, as she said at the hearings, it's not the law according to Amy. It's the law according to the American people.
Well, we can't hear you, Bill.
Sorry. Jeff, what do you think about the potential impact of her first decisions or her role?
Well, I have two thoughts on that. One is, I think if any of her early decisions are particularly unexpected, that will get some attention. If they're not, if she tends to vote on the controversial cases with Justice Thomas and the rest of the conservative bloc, so-called, I think it won't get a lot of attention. Chief Justice Roberts, caused a real explosion when he upheld the Affordable Care Act and was the deciding vote on that. If she does something like that, I expect people will notice. If she doesn't, and I don't suspect she will right away, then I don't think people will. The other issue is, I've seen justices sort of evolve over time. Like Justice Souter in the beginning kind of voted and ruled the way you would expect he would have, and over time he got to be the most liberal justice on the court. And some suggest that that's because of his friendship with William Brennan, who really knows. But I think if she does evolve in that direction, and no one can predict whether she will or won't, I think that it will probably be over time, rather than all of a sudden she just shows up and she's totally different than anyone expected.
Okay, Nick, I turn to you for wisdom and to help us land this show. What do you think? Do you think that people are going to overread into her first couple of decisions, or something else? And help us close this very lively portion of Lawyer's Den. Nick?
Well, I tend to agree with Jeff and Adam that she's not going to be writing the majority opinion or minority opinion. She's going to be given a role that is a lot less, a lot less in the limelight, at least to start with. So we're not going to know for quite some time. I just don't see anything that's going to be hugely something huge that would make a difference going on. So as we're getting close to the end of Lawyer's Den, we have another attorney that's just joined us, Beckett Cantley. Well, welcome to the Lawyer's Den. Can you hear us?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yes, we're actually.
I think it was my name.
Oh yeah. Well, the thing is, okay, for the people who don't know, Beckett Cantley is also a JD LLM attorney, along with Adam, who's a professor at the Georgia College, who's a JD LLM attorney, and Jeff Tykert, who's also a JD LLM attorney, and then we have Bill Tresvant, our host, who's a JD attorney. So, welcome to the Lawyer's Den, Beckett. Actually, you're joining us a little late because we're about to wrap up. We actually started at 7 Eastern.
I read it on the fly, and
okay.
It was 7 o'clock Central, which is my time.
7 o'clock Central. Okay, well, I think, are we going tomorrow, Bill? Are we doing a one at 7 o'clock?
We are.
We'll get you an invite for tomorrow.
Okay, that sounds great.
Okay, and it starts at 7 o'clock Eastern, which I guess is 6 o'clock on your time. But we're about to wrap, and it's at the hour, so we're about to wrap. So I'd like to thank everybody for showing up to the Lawyer's Den, and thanks to Beckett Cantley. Hopefully we'll be able to see him tomorrow, and I guess we're going to head on off in just a moment as soon as I can find the wrap here. Where's the wrap here?
Well, the wrap is that we have an excellent panel, and I miss them all.
We do. We do have an excellent panel. That's for sure. And you'll be given the issues before too, because Bill sends all the issues out. All right, we'll see you tomorrow on Lawyer's Den.